So last month rather was the first month that I did the intros and not the nicely, calmly paced Nick with his cool Italian kind of style. You got this Brit that speaks too quickly. And I garbled on for a long, long time. So I'll get straight to the point tonight. I'll football this together. Just wait, I came across Joseph 7 or 8 years ago or so. Rob Waring kind of virtually introduced us like through the emails. But I have seen Joseph present at some conferences twice, and this isn't a setup. He's easily the best presenter I've ever seen, from my from my opinion. Okay, my
I
opinion
am
isn't a great
so
one.
sorry.
Simply because you draw people in so well, like not like a performance. The words you use, you make things so you can relate to them, so relatable. You bring whatever, from university teachers to ALTs to elementary school teachers, it makes everything kind of relatable in a really, I don't know, makes you feel good way. So I'm incredibly grateful that Joseph would come tonight, and you could all witness this. And I do urge you, when things are more in person, to go and see him present somewhere.
Can I just say that, like, the worst way to put pressure on someone who's going to be speaking is to say that they're the best presenter you have ever seen? Are you kidding me? This is horrible.
I
Now
say it
everyone
every
is
month.
guaranteed to be disappointed.
Joseph, I say it every month. It's okay.
Yeah, I believe it. That's very kind of you. That's very, very kind of you.
Obviously, I haven't been to millions and millions of presentations in my life, or maybe it was just the way that Joseph speaks that kind of spoke to me personally. I don't know, but it was nice. So it spurred off an interest in me in intercultural communication, and I have his books here regularly at hand. If you have any more books, please do show them.
Oh, I've
They're
got
all
lots
my
of books. I mean, but I'm going to be giving, I have a free download for anybody who wants my most recent book. This book, $80. Are you kidding me? But you can download the PDF for free. I have that. I mean, it's crazy the way that publishing is going these days.
It's very generous of you, Joseph. I mean, Joseph is putting together the course on ALTTO Training Online on intercultural communication, and people who complete that course can access the PDF. So it's very generous that you're giving it now to people, attendees of Agora tonight. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so I need to get to work on that course. I've been putting it off for too long. Thank you for pushing me a little bit.
That's all right. I'll send another nudge later.
Keep after me. So could you remind me of the schedule and the structure for today?
Okay, sure. So your speech your presentation will be 10 or 15 minutes or so. Don't worry if you go over 10 or 15 minutes or so. And then Chilano, I think, has got the host. She'll divide everyone into breakout rooms. And then you go into your breakout room and continue it's more of a discussion in your breakout room. You can talk as much as you like, open discussion. That's 50 minutes, am I right? That's
sure.
About 50 minutes.
Yeah, let's go with that.
Yeah, thanks for that. So that'll be 50 minutes, and there'll be a timer, like you've got 2 minutes left in this breakout room. And then we'll come back. And just a couple of minutes just to say thanks to everyone, any final comments, then goodbye. Is that okay? Okay, so I won't go on. Please take the floor, Joseph, and stun everyone with your your knowledge and skill.
Thank you. It's very kind of you to abuse me with that praise. And I'm just happy to see everyone. I know that not everyone will be able to turn on their cameras, but if you can turn on your camera, it really helps for us to get a feeling of being together. And it helps so that we can see how we are all reacting to the stuff that we're talking about. So thank you to everyone who's willing to turn on your camera and able to turn on your camera. I The first question is, who likes theory? Okay, so some people love theory, some people hate theory. And this is just, I want to get a feeling for where we are here. So 5 means I love theory. 1 means I hate theory. So where are we on the love and hate theory scale, everybody? Just hold up your fingers. We got 3s, we got 4s. 3s and 4s, we got 3s. That's pretty impressive. There are no 1s. And we got 3s and 4s here. Okay, so I will speak at about a 3.5. Okay, so if you're a 2, you'll be like, well, a little bit. And then if you're a 4, you'll be like, a little bit more. But all of my slides have lots of pictures. So if you don't like theory, just look at the pictures and don't worry about the words, because the visuals are enough. What I'm going to be talking about today, and let me warn you that my thought is I'm just going to give you, dump some things on you so that we have something to discuss. And the title is The Odd Contradiction of Language and Culture Learning. And let me give you the conclusion. The conclusion is that language and culture learning are often, a lot of language teachers think of them as separate things. From the brain and mind perspective, language learning is a form of cultural learning. That's the conclusion. Language learning is a form of cultural learning. And if you understand the process of cultural learning, you'll see the relationship with language learning. And so that's the conclusion today. And I want to just throw a few ideas, or just give you a little bit of background about how language and culture learning works from the brain and mind perspective. So the odd contradiction that I'm talking about, first of all, is that everybody says language and culture are related. Oh yeah, you gotta learn the language to learn the culture. You gotta learn the culture to learn the language. Yet, in most classrooms, and even among specialists, language and culture are treated separately. Anthropologists and linguists do different things. Yet everyone says they're closely related. So there's this strange dilemma. As language teachers, we say that they're related, but it's actually quite difficult to bring them together in the work that we do. And this is kind of the way that it works for a lot of people. I'm a language teacher. I've got all this stuff I've got to do. How do I add culture to that? It's just not possible. And if you look at traditional language culture, traditional learning models for language and culture, they're often talked about in very separate ways. Language learning is often talked about as knowledge or as a skill or habit formation. It's talked about in terms of acquisition, like an information processing. Culture learning is often talked about very abstractly, like awareness or intercultural competence, higher order perception, developmental, intercultural sensitivity, all of these very big abstractions. So on the one hand, you've got language being discussed as a kind of knowledge system, information system, and you have culture being discussed as a kind of awareness or high-level processing. But that's not how it works, actually. And we know that because we're understanding more and more about cognitive functions and including the relationship between language and culture and cognitive processes. This book on the left, Louder Than Words, I particularly recommend. This is Neurolinguistics, the science of how the mind makes linguistic meaning. All of these PowerPoint slides will be available for you. So just to let you know that there is a body of work out there And I will say that there's more complexity and more. If you want to go deep, you can go deep. There's plenty of stuff there, but it doesn't have to be complicated. And I think some of the basic things, some of the basic insights that we can get from here are not that difficult. So here's the first thing. What is culture? A lot of people get hung up on this question of what is culture, and they'll say, well, there are all these definitions. It's so hard to explain. But brain scientists have a very straightforward definition of culture that works for language teachers very well. From the brain perspective, culture is simply patterns of behavior and meaning. And those patterns are in your mind, in your cultural knowledge, and they're in the world around us. And when you're in an unfamiliar environment, the patterns outside of you are different than the patterns inside of you. And so culture is simply dynamic, complex patterns in the mind and in the world around us. And this is very helpful because when we're talking about culture, it's easy to get confused. So you've probably heard conversations like this. Well, how's Japan? What are the people like? Well, they're kind of shy. Well, I know a Japanese who isn't shy at all. Well, not all Japanese are shy, but in general. But that's just a stereotype. Each person is a unique individual. Well, of course they are, but often, they act shy. Well, what's the problem here? The problem here is that we talk about culture as being something that's shared. Yet we are all individuals. So it's shared, but there's individual variation. And we get hung up on this. For some reason, we don't get hung up on it with language. Language is the same way. We share a linguistic system, but how we use the language is very individualized. You have to know the language to use it in a very individualistic way. And culture is the same way. Culture is basically the shared patterns of meaning that give you kind of the rules of the game. So culture does not determine behavior. Culture lets you know how things will be interpreted. And you can play the game however you like to play the game. So when you see that culture is really about shared meaning, actually, let's look at this definition here just a second. Culture, patterns of shared meanings. Wait a second. What's language? Patterns of shared meaning. When I say dog, that's a shared meaning we have, and dog is the linguistic symbol that's connected to that shared meaning. We're getting close here, right? We're already seeing that language and culture from the brain perspective are quite closely related. So I'm not going to show you this video now, but go to YouTube, look at this, the Brain Dictionary. It talks about how language is organized in the brain. Language is not organized through grammatical categories. There is no language center in the brain. In the brain, language is organized in terms of experience. Not concepts. So linguistic meaning is connected to experience, not to abstract concepts. What this means is linguistic meaning is not a system of abstract concepts or symbols. Our brain is not a conceptual dictionary. Instead, when we hear a word, our brain simulates the experience that is associated with that word. Language creates a simulation. So if someone says, well, my dog jumped over the pool. Wow, amazing. No, not really. If you have a small dog, when I say dog, the image of dog that will come into your mind will be a small dog. If you have a big dog, probably the image that comes to your mind will be a big dog, because the word dog is not simply a concept. The word dog is an experience. Language triggers an experiential simulation. Ask your students, say dog, and ask them what picture comes to mind, and you'll get all these different kinds of dogs. Well, how does this relate to culture? Well, it relates to culture because culture is shared, it comes from shared experience. How was your weekend? Well, Sunday was the 4th of July. Yes, it was. So we had hot dogs. Huh? Did you see any fireworks? Huh? So the person on the right is an American, a US American, and the 4th of July is Independence Day. But the person on the left doesn't know that. For the person on the left, he doesn't realize there's a difference between July 4th and the 4th of July. July 4th is the day after July 3rd. The 4th of July is Independence Day. If you're an American and I say, if you're a US American and I say the 4th of July, the image that comes to your mind relates to your associations, to your experiences with the 4th of July. That's the language culture connection. Language triggers associations based in experience. So this is what it looks like. The explicit forms of the language represent shared meaning that comes from shared experience. So language is rooted in culture. Now you can chop the tree off and just have dictionary and a grammar textbook, but then it's dead. So the connection between language and culture is that when language is alive, if the language that you're using is alive, then it is connected to deep levels of the self. So this is what language and culture learning looks like from the brain perspective. In effect, language and culture learning are both a process of embodying patterns. If you go to a foreign environment, you start to notice things that are different and you start to learn how things work. That's an embodiment of foreign patterns, of foreign meaning. The same is true for language. Doesn't that look painful? Notice that there's the attentive mind and the intuitive mind. Those are separate cognitive systems. The attentive mind is rational thinking, the intuitive mind is pattern recognition, and they work together. When your students are in flow, the attentive mind and the intuitive mind are working together. The Red Book is all about this model, and this is the way that the brain internalizes complex knowledge. So this is a way of seeing that when we learn a language and when we learn culture, it's a very similar process. Those are neural networks down there at the bottom. Notice that between I2 and I3, there's a really big difference. I2 is like making sentences consciously in your brain. I3 is when you're using the language in a holistic way, not in a piece-by-piece way. I2 is cultural do's and don'ts. I3 is looking from a new cultural perspective. I3 there's a big jump. And you know how it's kind of miraculous sometimes when you're learning a language, things just kind of come together somehow? That's because language learning and cultural learning are emergent properties. Emergence refers to when complex systems come together and start functioning holistically. It's the difference between practicing the individual strokes of tennis and playing a game of tennis. It's the difference between consciously making sentences and having language together in your mind as a whole. I promised you lots of information. I'm going to stop in another minute or two. Here's my message. Introducing culture into language classes does not mean being a cultural expert. It means bringing an intercultural attitude to language learning. The classroom is an intercultural experience. Whether you use the word culture or not, your students are having an intercultural experience every time they walk into the classroom. And this doesn't matter whether you are speaking English as a first language or a second language. Being in this learning environment is a foreign experience. And if you speak English as a first language, you have certain advantages because you may be very comfortable with the language. But if you have learned English as a foreign language, you have more advantages because you understand this process that learners have gone through. If you want to introduce culture into language classes, there are lots of times that you can do it. You can do it when you're talking about language itself and how language is used. You can do it when you're talking about course. You can introduce it as course content. You can introduce cultural elements when doing communication practice. You can introduce culture when you're talking about how we learn languages and how language learning is an intercultural experience. And when you share about yourself and your own cultural and language learning experiences. So introducing culture is something that is integrated. It's not something that you keep separately as a separate piece. There are a few things that it's good for language teachers to know. It's good for language teachers to know some basics about culture. You should understand the language-culture connection and the fact that we have both attentive and intuitive learning processes. You should understand the difference between surface culture and deep culture. It's also quite important. I've got lots of resources for you that I'm happy to share, including an article, a book. I have a podcast, and I also do workshops. So I'm happy, and I'm also happy to share the slides for today. So I have dumped a bunch of stuff on you, and I'm trying to convince you not to think of language and culture learning as two separate things. And my goal has been to raise questions in your mind. For example, a lot of people think about language like it's an information system. But language is embodied. It's not simply information. So my goal is to try and stimulate questions in your mind to give you a new perspective on how powerful language learning is. And language learning is extremely difficult. And good language teaching is extremely difficult. It's easy to do badly, and it's hard to do well. So don't expect it to be easy. And don't expect to make the culture language connection that's going to be something that's easy. That is something that's as difficult as language learning itself. It's a big challenge. And finding the ways to do that in your classroom with your strengths and your weaknesses and your experiences and the classes that you're teaching is the challenge that each of us faces. But once we see these connections, these deeper connections between language and culture learning, it really gives us a new perspective on what we do. Because we see that we have the potential to change our students' lives. It's one of the few professions where you can trigger profound life-changing events by getting people hooked on this process, The goal is to hook our students. And when they are hooked, it's because culture and language have been connected at a deeper level. You don't get hooked on information, you get hooked on experience. So hooking your students by making learning experiential, by making it personal, by making it creative, by giving all the support they need, but also giving them the chance to express themselves and have choices, that's what hooks them. And it's that hook that makes learning deeper. And it's the deeper learning where language and culture are connected. So go deep, go experiential, go creative, and don't lose faith, because what we're doing is extremely difficult, but that's because it's so powerful and it's so challenging. So go for it.
It's that very simple paradox of, I said to the teachers, should I bow, if I'm in Japan, or should you not bow when you go to England? To what extent do we follow the behaviors? And as we're, cultural ambassadors, should we be doing them anyway? Should we purposely not be doing them to be ambassadors? It's to make people at ease, to make them happier, to read the air, to do them? Or is that contradicting our work contract? It's a balance. You want a tightrope every day. Our jobs are difficult. In conclusion,
I don't know. I speak Nihonglish. I don't know about you,
So
Shaules.
I have an opinion. Actually, I have an opinion about that, Nathaniel.
please.
The opinion is that the degree to which you adapt or not, or change yourself or not, is negotiable, but you should understand the impact of your behavior.
Mm.
You have a responsibility to understand the impact of your behavior before you choose. So if you choose to sit on the desk and drink coffee in front of your students, you should at least know how the students are going to feel about this, and how your colleagues are going to feel about this, and understand their thinking. And then you can decide to still do it if you decide. But so there is a responsibility to understand the impact of what we do. That's my opinion. And that's hard. That's hard.
Yeah.
And it's a degree. It's degrees of, how would you say, gradation? Because I'm painfully aware of my behavior as a member of a Japanese family, as a member of a Japanese staff, and I know there are certain things. I have tics that are specifically from the cultures in which I was raised, and I can't get over them.
Yeah.
And how many of my tics set off people around me? And they're subtle. They're subtle, but they're there. And sometimes they come out in my language in Japanese too.
Yeah, they'll be very deep in your subconscious, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. That's
so Nick's got some. Sorry, Elizabeth. So Nick's got some final words before everybody goes. He's got some important announcements, and then we can maybe continue the discussion for a little bit, and then say a very, very, very big thank you to Joseph. Let's hand over to you, Nick.
All right. Sorry, buddy, for being half here, half elsewhere tonight.
No worries.
So, in short, we're trying to optimize, redesign, kind of like step up Agora for next year. What I can say is for January, we have a pretty big event we're trying to put together, which is going to be a joint event with another group of people meeting and talking about education in schools. And hopefully it's going to be pretty interesting in trying to bridge the gap between ALTs and Japanese teachers. So this is going to happen around January 26th. So mark the dates on your calendars. It's going to be on a Wednesday this time. Plus, we're trying to think what we want to achieve with Agora for next year. The general consensus is that we want to give more space to practicing ALTs, give you the chance to try and, come on the stage. It's also a good way to start if you would like to share your ideas, to even start presenting or something. This could be a great starting point. As you can see, Agora is pretty easygoing. in terms of as an event. So it's pretty easy to start from here. We'll be sharing more information, more news on this as we move forward. So please stay tuned and bear with us also next year. That's all.
Thank you, Nick.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joseph.
Happy to be in touch with anybody who'd like to be in touch. I put information in the chat window, so check out the things I've put there. You guys are great. Keep up the good work.
Thank you.